Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Special Codes. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Nathan.
Last week, we asked a question that had to do with binary. We asked, when is it or isn't it appropriate to have a binary system in society? And today, we would like to answer that question ourselves because it's only fair. We ask you for an answer, we should answer it ourselves. So that's what we're here to do today, is give our own thoughts and opinions, and keep in mind this is just our thoughts and our opinions. We aren't saying this is exactly how it is. We're just here to start a discussion.
We aren't establishing a binary system right now. We are just giving our opinions.
Correct. So to start off, I'll go ahead and start talking about what I think a binary system is appropriate in society. And in our episode, I talked about traffic lights, which I think are important to have as a binary system. But I'd also like to expand that to go into clarity and understanding of what people are talking about. And what I mean by that is you need to understand what words mean and what things are, because if you lack that understanding, then it's very hard to communicate with people. So in some ways, I think it's important to have a binary system, as in, this word means this. It does not mean this other thing. Granted, that's sort of a loose binary because words change over time and words can mean different things. But in general, I think in communication, it really helps for understanding when definitions of things are consistent so that people understand what we're talking about and what we mean. While it's probably a loose binary, I do believe it's useful to have a binary like structure to that to assist in understanding. And this also jumps into scientific discovery. Part of that is we have a definition of something. For instance, dog. We know what a dog is. We have characteristics and a definition for dog. If we find a new organism, we can apply that definition, say, is this a dog? And if it doesn't meet that definition, then we can say no. Or we can say, if it does meet that, we can say yes. Now, granted, there's always going to be cases where there's going to be cross characteristics. There's debates of what pandas are, for example. But I think in general, it's very important to have binary things in scientific discovery definitions and in definitions that we use to help understanding, help discovery, help us learn, help us know what we're looking at and looking for.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and even just building off of that, I think that for my side, I think that binary is really a great tool used for assessment. So, like what you're talking about with science, we have kingdom, phylum, class, the whole order of where things fit into things. And it is a process of binary. Does it fit into one of these categories? Now, granted, with the kingdom phylum, there's more options than that, but is it this class? Yes or no? Is it this one? Yes or no? And I think like when it comes to assessment tools, binary is really helpful to move into a progression of understanding, which in later episodes, we're also going to be talking about the logic gates, which will be really helpful in this conversation too. Because as I was listening to you talk about it, I think that one of the things that binary allows us to do is to really have a good tool for testing and assessing the validity, the strength, the lack of strength that we have when we are creating our own understanding of the world around us, or even just trying to figure out different solutions. Like, for instance, with math, that's what I teach. Some of the things that we ask students to say is, what's the step here? Or is this the right one? Yes or no? And then if they answer that, that leads them to the next clue to what they need to do. So I think as an assessment tool, binary is a really powerful thing to use.
I would agree. It's very useful in learning and stuff like that, step by step instructions, how to build something. here are the steps you need to take. Have you done this? Yes, no. It helps you not get lost in process.
Right. I was thinking some of the most iconic comedy things that people have when it comes to assessing tech things is, have you turned on or off your computer? It's
Have
one
you
of
turned
those.
it off and on again?
Yeah. Have you made sure that it's plugged in? There's a process which we go through, yes or no, which leads us to our next binary solution, which in some ways, again, goes back to logic gates, which we're going to talk about in our next full episode, episode 3. But I think that when we talk about where its strength is in helping us get to potential conclusions, I think one of the things, though, that's really kind of interesting and I think can cause some problems is when we use binary to make abstract claims, if that makes sense. So, like using a yes or no process, sure, we use the process of elimination, but to, like, for instance, going back to your, is this a dog? There are some instances where, like what you mentioned, sometimes things don't fit into a certain category. And so binary is not helpful in those settings because it doesn't fit here and it doesn't fit here. How do we deal with this? And I think that's where binary kind of gets a little sticky. And I think we see this quite often in politics and religion.
Yeah, morality and ethics as well.
Right. Oh man. I mean, so when it comes to ethics, we need to use logic. Like, I think logic has a really great structure to it, and the use of logic is important. However, I have been working with ethics, religion for a long, long time, and there are times where there's not a yes or no answer, and sometimes there's not a better or best answer. And I think that binary does not work here in a lot of these settings.
Not in every single case.
No, and I would say, like, with politics, especially, we were discussing this. We were mentioning the difference of urban to rural, farm to apartment, the way people live lives in their necessity. When you make laws that blanket statement that are binary, it affects people negatively, and we don't always think about those consequences. And I think that's where binary is a hindrance to us.
I agree. There are a lot of laws you can make. I don't really want to get political here or go make any
Mm-hmm.
present day commentary on things, but there are a lot
Oh,
of laws
come
you could
on.
there are a lot of laws you can make that work in a city,
Mm-hmm.
but they do not work out in the country. And
Right.
vice versa. You can make laws that work out in the country but don't work in a city because
Mm-hmm.
they're different settings. And I think all too often politicians and people in power want to make one size fits all rules, and they just don't recognize that there are different areas and different settings where things can or can't work.
Exactly. Well, and especially like you're saying, inner city needs and the challenges that they face with high density population, housing shortages, how to care for people who are homeless or in need, jobs, those kind of things. Even though in a smaller community, some of those might be issues, they're on a very small scale to where it's the community itself kind of naturally takes care of itself in some ways. And so the law doesn't necessarily need to be there because if it does happen, my experience has been that in smaller communities, they tend to know more of the need and so are able to step into that. And a law isn't necessarily needed to make that happen. Now, that's not always the case. Again, that's why it shouldn't be binary because we can't just say yes, no, this is it, this is not it. And we have to be very careful. And I think this is why we see movements like, what was it, the Greater Idaho movement or whatever that is? Is that what it's
Yes,
called?
the
Where
Greater Idaho Movement.
where people are wanting to move away from the laws of a highly populated thing that are affecting them in a rural setting. Now, is that the best solution? I don't know. Again, we're not trying to get super political here, but I think that's a great example of people who are experiencing a kind of binary system that doesn't work for them. And so as a result, they're seeking something different that would work better. And so I think when we talk about binary, making laws or even orthodoxy within religion, the right way to do worship, the right way to worship God, the right way to view the universe, using that as binary can be sometimes very divisive and honestly not help people grow in that. And so sometimes that can be a little bit challenging within religion. I don't think that binary can be used holistically with religion, and it's actually very dangerous too in both those areas. So
Right. Well, and I think one of the huge problems with using a binary system for everything is when you make moral judgments on other people based off of opinions you hold or ideals you hold that the other person may not. I mean, we see this in politics and religion and every aspect. It's not just those, it's every aspect of society. Oh, you disagree with me on this, then you're evil. Or I saw you do this one bad thing, and now I think of you as an evil person, even though there might have been a reason for it, or
yeah.
we
Well,
were very quick to snap to, oh, you're evil because you did this one bad thing or because you disagree with me.
I've been a pastor for quite a while. There was a movement that came out quite a while ago where they established the fundamentals of religion, of the church. And a lot of people adopted these fundamentals as part of who they were and how the church should look and operate. And unfortunately, a lot of those fundamentals are not scriptural. And the way that they have become part of people's lives have actually been very destructive to relationships, to people. And I think like with creating the fundamentals or that foundation of saying like this is not, it really put walls up between building relationships with people who aren't like us or aren't like that group. And so what happened naturally is it became more separatist and removing themselves from people. And unfortunately, really ultimately damaging, I believe, to the ability to build relationships and grow in the world, in and around the community that we're placed in. And I think that's a great example of like a binary system. When something's created and says this is not, in every aspect of our lives, I think that's challenging because sometimes that's not always the case. Life happens and it's not a yes or no answer.
Right. And to your point about religion, it's not just religion. People give religion a hard time sometimes, including myself. But what people have to understand is that name one aspect of social society, religious or not, where stuff like this doesn't happen or isn't rampant.
Yeah, I mean, anytime that you have conflicting views of anything, you have to establish exactly what you're saying with science as some sort of foundation. And sometimes that's helpful, but also like what you were saying too, is if there's not room and allowing for it to grow and change as people do, as needs arise, it becomes a hindrance. It becomes something not helpful. That's a hard one though. I mean, anytime as we were even talking, we're like, let's stay away from religion and politics, and you just can't, because especially when we're talking about this binary conversation, because that's the area where binary needs to kind of stay away.
There's probably times or instances where it is helpful to have binary in those, but I think the problem is people overuse binary systems.
Right.
They take the concept of binary, they say, okay, well, this thing in this instance is a binary, therefore everything else should be as well. And that's not necessarily the case.
And I think you're right in religion, especially because that's like one of the biggest areas. I think we have the Apostles' Creed. We have this place where people set a foundation of what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it not mean to be a Christian? And even that's debatable, but a group of people got together and said, these are the core of our faith. And it's been held for so long. Also, within certain denominations, they have the core values or their core things. Like, this is what makes us us. And I would say majoritively, most of those are really founded in good things. I think that some of them are probably secondary issues, but it's good to define who you are. This makes us us. But then on the secondary issues, like what you said, like there's a ton of rules and regulations that some religions get into that I'm like, why did we need to define that? It gets a little messy there. So, anyways.
I think that's also another reason why, I mean, I have only really interacted with and been around Christians. I haven't really interacted with many people of other religions. But I think that this is a problem that every religion faces when people start making binary systems and people on the outside of that look in and see that as off-putting. So it really damages people's religions and their people's perceptions of their religions.
Yeah. There's just so much there that I think is potentially harmful when it comes to those binary things. And especially for putting, like, I think you just said it, is like when we put that on people who are not within or even without. People aren't within my tradition. For me to put upon them a binary system that I hold to true, that's not fair to them. They don't know the binaries that I operate off of. And so why is that even something to consider to put on them? And so I think that with binary systems, maybe for yourself, it's a good thing to have. And this is where, when we talk about logic gates again, it's a really good thing to have some binary systems within ourselves, but to presuppose and forcibly put those upon other people, I don't think that that's okay either.
To bring it back to tech, because that's supposed to be my world.
Right.
One huge binary that I think shouldn't be necessarily a binary. I believe we're going to talk about this in another episode. I just want to touch on it here. Is the way in which people code or arrive at the same solution. There are so many people who insist that there's only one way to do something when there are multiple ways of doing it. I, as a programmer, need to be careful. Just because I would program something some way to make it work doesn't mean that when somebody programs it a different way and makes it work, that's wrong.
Right. I think that's really huge. When I think that applies to people in our, like we kind of mentioned this, is just the way that I view life does not mean that somebody else's view of life is wrong or even contradictory to my own. The way that I see the world may actually be surprisingly akin to somebody else. And so finding those common grounds is big, but we can't have binary in those things. Hey guys, thanks for joining us today in our conversation of Taylor and I sharing our ideas. We'd love to hear comments from you on our YouTube channel. That's where we really check to see what people are saying, and we'd love to have you join our conversation. We don't expect ourselves to be experts, and we don't necessarily know all the things that are going on in your mind. So please drop a comment about what you think. Agree or disagree with us. You know, we'd love that conversation, and we don't think everybody's going to agree with us, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. We want to grow as much as other people do in our understanding. So please leave a like on the video. Also, leave a comment. Talk with us about what's going on.
Thanks, everyone.
Talk to you next time.